Hello and welcome to all of our panelists and guests. Just a bit quick housekeeping here. We're going to be recording today's panel for future viewing, so let's try and keep it PG here. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Adam Hawkins. I have the honor of serving as your moderator this afternoon. I, along with our team here at Global External, help mining companies define and work with political, regulatory, reputational, and social risk, and build lasting partnerships with our host communities. I'm based here in sunny Phoenix, although I've worked on every continent except for Antarctica, and I am a fifth-generation Arizona native. With us, we're happy to be joined by, from the Office of Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, Buchanan Davis, who is Governor Ducey's Natural Resource Policy Advisor. In his role, he's the guy who oversees all the agencies that regulate the natural resources in the state. This includes Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, Arizona Department of Water Resources, State Land Department, just to name a few. Prior to that role, Buchanan was on the government relations team for U of A, University of Arizona, bear down, and prior to that with the office of U.S. Senator Jeff Flake. Next up, we are working on bringing him in, although he's having a few technical issues. I'm hoping that we can get him on here pretty quickly. But from the Canada-Arizona Business Council, we have Ambassador Emeritus Glenn Williamson. Glenn is also the chairman of EPCOR, a Canada-based private water utility and one of Arizona's largest, and pretty much the guy who knows more about global trade between Canada and our beautiful state of Arizona. And from Arizona Sonoran Copper Company, we're joined by Travis Snyder. Travis, like me, is also an Arizona native. He's been on the front lines of all the company's efforts to bring the U.S.'s, what we're hoping will be the fourth largest independent copper producer online. Travis has been in the mining industry for decades and has worked on the permitting and discovery of new deposits. And last but certainly not least, we are happy to be joined by Steve Trussell. So when it comes to mining in Arizona, this is the guy who knows more about the industry than any other person. Steve's the executive director of both the Arizona Mining Association and the Arizona Rock Products Association. So he doesn't just know hard rock, he also knows his shop on aggregates. And Steve is a very, very savvy political operator. He's respected by both sides of the aisle and has been at the center of politics and regulatory affairs in Arizona for decades. So a very, very warm Arizona welcome to our panel and all of those of you who have joined us as our guests. So with that, I'm going to direct the first question to Steve, since I picked on your bio the very last. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. So the last permitted facility to come online in Arizona was Florence Copper, located in Pinal County, just like Arizona Sonoran. Though there have been a number of mines that have been in permitting processes and have had issues throughout. Tell us a little bit about why Arizona is a great place to mine, a great place to explore, and what exploration and development companies need to know to proceed with their business plans.
That's a great question, Adam, and thank you for having me. We've got some distinguished guests here, and I'm grateful for that, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to include Buck and Travis and just, you know, the great. Well, let me start with some baseline information about Arizona. So we are, according to the USGS, the #1 producer of non-fuel minerals. So, and that's in the U.S., and that was not just last year, but this year as well. We have a tremendous mineral endowment, as most people know, and the principal minerals produced here are copper and molybdenum, but we also have rare earths, lithium, zinc, silver, gold, and so forth. And we even have potash and helium, not metals, but obviously there's a great deal of interest in Arizona right now because demand for these materials is skyrocketing, as you are well aware. So 74% of our nation's copper comes from our great state. We're the fourth largest producer in the world. And let's see if I get this right. We're behind Chile, Peru, and China. And I'm going to talk a lot about China today because there are some dynamics there that are really important to what's going on in Arizona. Rock products and construction aggregates, from an economic standpoint, we're looking at about a $5.9 billion industry. In the hard rock industry, we're looking at about a $14.2 billion. So, I mean, this is a huge portfolio in Arizona, totaling out at about $20.1 billion collectively. Arizona, just so you know, I don't know how many of you are familiar. I'm sure if you're from Canada, then you are familiar with the Fraser Institute and the work that they do to rank different jurisdictions in terms of their favorability to investment for mining. And so we recently saw the 2022 report, basically, and I can break that down as to why, but one of the main reasons why Arizona is still ranked as one of the top 10 jurisdictions or globally is because of our political climate, obviously our mineral endowment, and our ability to get permits through at the state level. Now, obviously, federal interface is super important. So back to Adam's original question. So, what does it look like on the ground right now? Interesting time to be asking the question, because in 2 weeks, that could change dramatically. We have a major election coming up, and obviously politics have everything to do with our ability to get projects on the ground or not, depending on how easy or not individual agencies are to work with, especially if they're authorizing or permitting agencies. The good news for us is the last two administrations, the Brewer administration and also the Ducey administration, have been excellent partners in getting these projects moving along. And so we've always been grateful for that. And, Buck is that's due in large part the work of somebody who understands the importance of the natural resource industry and is advising the governor. So that's great we have you here. That all said, it still takes about 10 to 12 years on average, and I'll let either Adam or Travis correct me if I'm wrong there, to get one of these projects permitted. So what I'm seeing right now is a kind of a paradigm shift. One, I want to reemphasize there's an excitement about mining that I have, the likes of which I've not seen. So there are a lot of new players from an exploration and development standpoint that are coming on the scene. That's really exciting. When people ask me what's working in Arizona agencies that are working with the mining industry to get these licensing timeframes advanced is definitely one thing. The other thing that I think is working is the tremendous amount of effort that the governor's office has taken to advance the Arizona management system. So continuing to refine the efficiencies to get these permits out the door. Do we still have our challenges? Yes, we do. We're not going after the typical easy to get to types of ore bodies. Sometimes they're more complex, and obviously, you've got legal issues, you've got technical issues, and so forth. But recognizing that there are now there used to be 35 critical minerals on the list. It's now up to 50. That's an indicator to me that the federal government is saying we need to mine, and we need to mine fast if we're going to realize this new green economy. So I hope that is the tip of the iceberg answer to your question, Adam. I'd be happy to continue on, but I'd love to hear from Buck his take on what he's hearing on that front.
Well, Steve, that's a great segue, because next up I've got a two-part question exactly for Buck. we've got a number of different things that are in play right now when it comes to developing practically anything or building practically anything in Arizona. So first part of my two-parter is, so you can't talk about Arizona without touching on the subject of water. So I know you and the governor, the state legislature have been working really, really hard to solve this problem and to address our future water needs. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then, second part of the question is maybe outside of water, can you comment on some of the other areas where the state has taken efforts to streamline the regulatory process and really kind of ease the burden of folks who want to invest in our state?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Adam, and piggyback off. Maybe I'll answer that second part first because it dovetails with what Steve was talking about. With this administration, of course, we're at the tail end, just a few more months left, 60 days, something like that. But this administration is focused very heavily on reducing the regulatory burden. And Steve mentioned the Arizona management system. There's been some executive orders that the governor has had every year, trying to take away regulations. For every regulation that you implement, you need to take a few away. I think Steve even sits on a few commissions, or at least a commission that deals with the government regulatory review council, that we're really focused on trying to get rid of wasteful, outdated regulations and rules here. And it's been a focus of the governors. And we would like to think that, well, we have seen the benefits of that, and the agencies, as you know, an agency, it takes a lot of turns at that helm for you to start to turn a ship. But we've seen some of the agencies really turn around, and they're still doing their job. They're still in compliance. We're still, making sure that we are up to standards and that we're being environmental stewards and all of the rest. But we can do that while also being available and open to conversation with stakeholders and industry, and making sure that we're having conversations that we can and we're moving the ball along. And we've done that as our state. We've been able to have those conversations and move the ball forward. And so, yes, it's been a huge focus of this governor. But I'd just like to emphasize what Steve has said. We are in transition now. I mean, especially after the election, we'll see what that brings. I think I can talk to what we've done in the last 8 years, but moving forward, it's really going to depend on some of the elections at the legislature and, of course, the chief executive governor election. But I feel that we've created momentum in this administration, that we're really showing that we can bring industry, we can bring jobs, we can bring all of this good thing if we have a little common sense on some of the regulatory side of things. And I believe that we've done that, and we'll continue to do that as a state. Now, on the water specifically, Adam, it is an interesting question. It's a tough question. We are facing water challenges, as is the rest of the West. We're not alone. About 36% of our water sources for the state come from the Colorado River. A lot of headlines on the Colorado River, how the hydrology isn't what we would like to see there. But nevertheless, and this may sound cliche, but it's absolutely true, Arizona has been very aggressive on our water policy for decades. We pride ourselves in how proactive we are, and we will continue to be proactive in our water management, water policy. We'll point back to Groundwater Management Act, where we issued some rules on groundwater regulations back in the 80s. You can go even further in how aggressive we were in bringing the CAP canal, which is the infrastructure that brings our Colorado River into the state. Last couple of years, we worked with other Western states on a drought contingency plan. And so we've done hard things in this state, but not the least of which is this last session, we were able to expand the state's authority through the WIFA board, we call it. It's the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. and there's been a lot of movement. We're putting board members now and and we're getting that set up. We're also, the state and the legislature and the governor have invested $1 billion into finding new water sources to bring them into the state. So what this WIFA will do is it will allow us to invest heavily in water. It will invest heavily in conservation and reuse and finding new water sources. And it really does represent an all of the above sort of strategy. It also will allow the state to invest in infrastructure. And for the first time, the state will have the ability to acquire, own, sell, and store new water, not water within the state, but new water that might come in. So this is the mechanism that we've created to really allow us to go solve our water problems. And we're going to continue to fund it. We're going to continue to build. And it does happen that the governor has asked me to be on the board for that. So I'm excited about that opportunity to continue the work. There's nine members will be on that board, and it's taken from all around the state. And so we're really going to use that board to help solve our water problems statewide. And you won't see anything like it across the country, how aggressive Arizona is being in acquiring water and making sure that we secure our water future. And it feels in some ways maybe platitudes, but it really, I think the aggressive nature of an investment, $1 billion, shows that Arizona is serious, has been serious, and will continue to be serious about securing our water. And so it's an exciting part, again, stepping up to the challenges. So I think it's a good time for continued investment in Arizona in that sense, because we're not shying away from the hard things. We're tackling them head on. So I'll turn it back over to you with that, Adam, but happy to follow up with anything you might need.
I think you really captured it in between the state regulatory streamlining and the $1 billion is the biggest investment our state has ever made in water supply, water infrastructure. So it's great. And I'm really happy to see you on that board, in addition to everything else. For those who don't know, Buck's also a resident of Pinal County. So we're happy to see Pinal represented on the board. I'm hoping that we were able to cut through some of the technical difficulties and we were able to get Glenn Williamson on the line with us. He may be audio only. He's, I think, in transit, which is one of the new realities of this new world we've stepped back into, is that, we used to hop from video meeting to video meeting, and now you literally have to drive from place to place. So, Glenn, if you can hear us, I've got a question for you. So when we talk about international trade in Arizona, the focus is traditionally on Mexico. But Canada is a huge part of our state's foreign direct investment landscape. Can you comment a little bit on Canada's role in Arizona's economy and just how big a part Canada plays in mining? Uh-oh, I think we may have lost him again. All right, I'm going to put that question on the shelf and we'll come back to him. Travis, Steve kind of touched on this a little bit. When we're talking about permitting in Arizona, Arizona Sonoran, for those who aren't familiar, is the Cactus Mine is completely located on private land. Can you run through the difference of permitting an operation on private land versus public land and the general process Arizona Sonoran follows? Also, when it comes to federal permitting, are there similarities to state permitting, and what are the differences in the process? I'm thinking, for example, of Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act standards. Are both the state and federal agencies, are they regulating the same, and are you regulated at Cactus Mine the same? Followed by, if you can just give us kind of a brief overview of what permits you already have in hand and what permits are on the horizon.
That's perfect. And yeah, actually, the first question is a really great question. We get asked this a lot about what's the difference between private versus federal lands. And the one key thing is that with private land, there's no federal nexus. Now, that's not to say that it's not always that way, but as long as you don't have a connected activity like bringing in a road or bringing in infrastructure or waters of the US that affect your land, then you do not have any federal permitting requirements, which means that you don't have to go through an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. And as we all know, those can take years to get approved, and they're also subject to litigation. Also, our state Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has teamed with the industry and industry experts in helping streamline a lot of their permitting processes through something called Best Available Demonstrated Control Technologies, or BADCAT. And this was really to allow mining companies to design a facility that's already set, that they say, this is the minimum requirement, and as long as you do that, you don't do anything prescriptive. And so that's really changed the game for a lot of mining companies and permitting here. Next, similarities and differences. Both state and federal permits are required to comply with the same clean water and clean air, which is good. I mean, that's what we want. The major differences between the two is that the state has set timelines for either approval or denial of an application. And this allows a mining company to know that their application, whenever it's submitted, will either be approved or rejected, as opposed to the federal government, where you put it in and there's no time frames. It's like a black box. You hope that it comes out the other end. Just for an example, whenever we did our APP amendment, or Aquifer Protection Amendment, we had that in under 180 days, which is the time frame for it. And that included a 30-day public consultation. So our state government is very efficient.
So Travis, it sounds to me like the state has every bit of the regulatory compliance without the additional time burden of the federal government. So having a project that's outside of a federal nexus sounds like the right place to be.
Yes, very true.
So kind of like Copper World, slightly different project. And for those who aren't familiar, Copper World is also a no federal nexus project. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. Glenn, bienvenue, mon ami. I see that you're here and you're with us. So I'm going to throw a question at you here, and I'm hoping that you can do it safely. I'm happy to see you're wearing your seatbelt there. And I'll just ask that as we go through this, just keep your eyes on the road. So, all right. So when we hear about trade in Arizona, typically the dialogue is focused on Mexico. But Canada is a humongous part of our state's foreign direct investment landscape. So can you discuss Canada's role in Arizona's economy and how big a part Canada plays in mining?
Certainly. Can you hear me?
You betcha. You're coming in loud and clear. Oh. You just went on mute.
I can concentrate on this.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure can.
That's good?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I apologize for being in that bad zone before, but there's a certain irony. I was behind a water ditch. And they just wouldn't pick up. So there was kind of humorous at that point. As chairman of a water company, getting stuck behind a water ditch in a conversation. To answer your question, yes, Canada is massively interested in the state of Arizona. Canada has about 500 companies here, including mine, which is EPCOR, and we are investing billions and billions and billions of dollars into the economy here. The 500 Canadian companies here employ tens of thousands of people. I don't see this slowing down. As a matter of fact, to your water point, I spent this morning on calls with two of the largest pension funds in Canada, having discussions with them about investing anywhere between $5 and $20 billion in the state of Arizona over the next 20 years in water. And the answer I got from them is, Great, show me the deals. We're currently putting that kind of money easily into India. We're putting it into other places all around the world. These are pension funds that are $800–900 billion in size, and they are very, very serious players. And our biggest issue here in the state of Arizona is picking a project of size and caliber that we want to do. And I can tell you, as someone whose company has spent a couple of $1 billion here in the last couple of years, we could spend another $4 or $5 billion just cleaning up the mess that was made from before and move forward. But we're going to have to start paying attention to some of the larger things going into the next big chunk of what's happening. That is of interest to a lot of Canadian companies because they're setting up million-square-foot plants down here like White Claw, like Core. There's a whole bunch of them coming in, and they want to make sure that water is here as well. So I think the long-term planning, Michael Crow, myself, and Stantec are working on this right now, and we've involved 146 entities from the governor on down to try to sort out what kind of options we in the private sector can bring to the table while the government goes down its very well-defined path. And my kudos to all of those involved in setting aside some money and making that a priority.
Well, that's exciting, Glenn. And, kind of being on the forefront of all of this stuff has got to be pretty exciting. So really appreciate having your participation in this panel.
Adam?
So, yes, sir.
May I just jump in and make a comment? I appreciate
Yeah, please do, Steve.
Because he's such a pivotal part of this discussion. The Canadian mining community is huge in Arizona, as we're all aware, not only because there's interest in our mineral endowment, but also because that's where a great deal of innovation and new technologies are coming from. We not only rely on our neighbors to the south for that, but we also rely heavily on our neighbors to the north. And a lot of our members, especially on the supply side, are from Canada or are based in Canada. So there is a lot of synergy there, and I see it only growing as the economy continues to boom. So I just wanted to add that on, if you don't mind.
And Steve, I'm just going to add 2 seconds, if I can, Adam, onto that. Steve, he's absolutely correct about the Canadian diaspora and the mining community, but more importantly than that is that 80% of all of them are being financed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And that's the part that really astonishes me every day when I take a look at the amount of capital being assembled on the Toronto Stock Exchange to be deployed in the state of Arizona's mining community. It's a real testament to the industry that you represent.
We've had the good fortune of being asked by the Arizona Commerce Authority to visit with companies considering Arizona as a landing place. And let me just throw out there, one of the things that makes Arizona attractive, aside from the other things that I had already mentioned, is the fact that we have a world-class mining school at the University of Arizona, which is, the Arizona legislature just took a vast interest in trying to finance. And coming in right behind that, we had more investment in the school. So, they're looking at a federal land, or securing 500 acres of federal lands to create a tech park down by the San Javier student mining lab. And there's some great things happening there from workforce development standpoint and so forth. But we have some, Arizona has a lot of things going for it right now. I mean, Tucson is a mining hub. You've got the University of Arizona down there. I would argue that Arizona State University, Glenn talked about President Crow and the work that they're doing there, one of the more innovative schools in engineering and innovation. And I just feel like, we're kind of hitting that perfect storm of, hey, there's a lot of great things, not to mention the interest and the need that's driving what's happening in mining in Arizona.
Yeah, that's it's tremendous, Steve, and that's kind of it's kind of a nice segue into the next question, which I'm going to open it up to the whole panel and just let any of you chime in on this. But we've got this growing demand for copper, and when you look at all of the infrastructure additions, when you look at all of the movement to electric vehicles and to renewables, everything that takes emphasis off of petroleum and carbon-based extraction almost exponentially expands the need for minerals like copper. So given that, can any of you talk kind of about how important it is to get projects permitted, and how long, and how is Arizona in particular meeting this demand?
That's a great question. I'll jump in just to make the comment that I think a lot is still going to be contingent upon our next election. As you are well aware, Adam. I mean, our next governor, our next U.S. senator, and whether or not we maintain, Republican or Democrat control of the House and Senate. Is going to matter going forward. So I think that first and foremost, that's the X factor. But as far as all of the other things that are aligned, I mean, Arizona is extremely favorable on a lot of fronts, including tax favorable, in terms of certainty, in terms of permitting. Reliance on infrastructure. I mean, we have very favorable infrastructure. We have very favorable political stability in terms of labor regulations and employment agreements, things like that people are thinking about when they're considering investing in Arizona. I think we have a lot going for us. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Steve. And Buchanan, I'm gonna actually point this a little bit at you, because I know the Governor Ducey and the team at the Arizona Governor's Office have worked really hard to attract so many new businesses like Taiwan Semiconductor and the expansion of the Intel facilities, Lucid Motors. How are we meeting the demands of these through our mineral industry?
Well, you're exactly right. The first thing, Adam, is what we're doing, and it's in every conversation, is we're helping them understand, or we're enlisting their support, right? Companies want to come in and they have these environmental goals, which are great, but they also need to understand that we need the minerals to go along with it, and helping them understand that we have it right here in Arizona. As Steve pointed out, we have the mineral department, or, deposits here. We have the copper here, and I have seen in the last few months that a more higher recognition that if we want to go down this path of these type of industries, which we do, then we do need to be a lot more proactive on the mining side of things and help those projects along. And there's a lot more awareness of supply chain and what needs to happen to kind of break those down. And so you have some of these manufacturers who are wanting to advocate here at the state level or in DC to help break down barriers that might exist, and because they're seeing the importance of it, that their industries depend on strong mining. And I think there's more work to be done there, but it's been good to see a higher awareness all across the board. But also, like I said, when people come into the state and they want to invest, we have very frank conversations about those subjects and what we need to do to continue to make sure that we have the inputs needed for this type of new economy.
Thank you, Buck. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually turn the conversation over to a couple of the questions that have come in. And just a reminder for anybody who's joined us, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A tab over there. If you've got a question, just type it in there, and time permitting, we'll try to get to them. So we in the interim, we did get 2 questions related to water. So I'm going to put this both to Glenn and to you, Buck, because you two know water better than I think any two individuals in the state of Arizona. Buck is from the government side, and Glenn is the chairman of a water utility. So first question we got was: is Arizona considering desalination as a potential? And then what other sources of water can we tap into? So Glenn, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Can you hear me?
Sure can. You're coming through loud and clear.
You bet. Okay, so I just arrived at the racetrack, so that's perfect. Yes, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And what we have right now is a whole series of options that everybody knows about, but no decisions have been made. So we do have a desal discussion with Mexico that has gone on since 2017, probably a little earlier, but no triggers have been pulled. And that's also too small a project and would have to be expanded. There are discussions about rivers, there's discussions about cloud seeding, you name it, we've talked about it. What we're doing on that one, Adam, is we are, that's why Stantec is taking everybody's conceptual ideas, we're putting it into one big binder, and I've asked Michael Crow to sit down and pull 200 or 300 people together, everybody, all the smartest water people, and put them behind a door. And all I care about is that they come out at some point, a day or 2 days later, and pick a project for the long term. The short term and the medium term, that's a whole other set of things. But, you know, we've torn apart the Salton Sea project, which we at EPCOR and Stantec were both involved in, and that's probably not going to go anywhere. We have all sorts of different people that are throwing ideas around, but our biggest problem in the state is apathy. And we're now at that point where critical mass is starting to occur and decisions need to be made. We need to pull the trigger on what we are going to do down the road. Laying fallow a bunch of agricultural land and constantly tapping into a bunch of aquifers, these are all wonderful short-term deals, but we need to bring in something that is the equal size to the CAP for 20, 25, 30 years down the road. And if we don't do that, we're going to have some other issues of mixing and matching agriculture and people using different things. And the mining industry is lucky on this one because it sort of gets to sit on the sidelines as a user and watch the commercial development of million square foot manufacturing plants take the heat on what's going to come for water requirements. We're sitting probably north of 100+ million square feet of soft circled deals coming into this region that you know, it's going to start to take a toll. So we have to keep our eyes open, but more importantly, we have all the data in the world. We're really, really good at that. Now we need to make some decisions.
That's really, really good observation, Glenn. And Buck, I'll kind of push this to you. So, you know more about kind of our history here. You know, Arizona uses less water today than we did in the 1950s. And a lot of that is the changing dynamics of water. But Arizona, when you look back to the era of the HOCOM, Jack Swilling, who is famed with creating the canal system that helped Phoenix become Phoenix, quite frankly. What are some of the like really, really big and audacious projects that we're undertaking?
Yeah, that is a great stat that you put. You know, I think we're using the same or a little bit less water than we did in 1957 with, 6 times the economy and 16 times the population. And some of that is a transition away from agriculture, but a lot of that is just we're more aggressive on our water use. And but you're right. We're looking at that next horizon, and Glenn is absolutely right. There's a lot of ideas out there circling. In fact, when the governor and the state of the state mentioned $1 billion towards water, people came out of the woodwork. I was having meetings left and right, and they all had an idea, and most of them were bad. I'll tell you, most of them was snake oil. But you start to listen, and you're like, maybe there's something here, and I really think it's going to be a sort of an all of the above approach. Like I said, the legislature this year also invested money in some pilot projects for ag efficiencies. I think those type of things are going to be critical moving forward. We're just going to have to think differently in water across the board, across the gamut. Large projects, though, I think desalination really is. I've been convinced that it's our next big project. We might bring floodwaters from Mississippi, but that's been an idea, but that takes a lot of jurisdictions that water and pipelines would have to go through, and we're not necessarily good at building cross-jurisdictional pipelines right now in this country. So I'm a little bit more sold on the desal. It is more expensive, but there's a different ways that could be structured. We've talked about trading water for Colorado River, but we could also build a plant and have potentially direct sale. I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways to structure that down. I really think that desalination, I'm convinced that will be one of our larger kind of next frontier, our next big projects.
Thank you, Buck. And got another question here in the chat, and I'll take the first stab at this, and then I think I'm going to probably turn this to Steve next. But there's a question about if a company does have its mineral claims on federal lands, is there a portal in the state or place in the state that assists with navigating the federal regulatory system? And so I'll take the first step on it. I've worked on a lot of projects that are on federal lands over the course of my 20 years or so in this industry. Some are faster than others. A lot of it has to do with every project is kind of dynamically different based on just within the federal lands projects, whether they're on Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management. So the agency has a lot to do with what the process is going to be about, but a lot of it has to do with the way that projects are presented. There's a fair bit of know-how on this. I still am a believer in the fact that the United States is a great destination to explore and a great destination to develop new mines. But there is no doubt about it. The federal projects do take longer. And they do come with some additional process to it. But in terms of when I think of like the one group that knows how to navigate all of this, and Steve, I know a lot of folks have turned to you and have turned to the Arizona Mining Association. Steve, would you want to touch on that maybe a little bit?
Yeah, I think where the state's the most helpful with the feds is more about when we have an air quality, water quality, solid waste issue, any number of those types of issues that come down the pike from the feds, where the state has to address them. Our state has been very welcoming of thoughts and ideas of how to navigate those, because there may be requirements that are going to be very hard for us here in Arizona, given our unique situation, being an arid area, from an air quality standpoint or from a water standpoint specifically. And so what I've found over the years is that the DEQ, or Department of Environmental Quality, has been very solution oriented. Some of these regulations that we thought were coming from the feds that were going to be deal killers did not turn out to be that, because they were willing to kind of bring us together. And by the way, these are agencies that see us as customers, not the regulated community, which is just a refreshing departure from where we've been in the past. So that would be one example. The second example is, back in the day, the federal administration had it's not a new concept, but this one federal decision where they were trying to get everyone working towards the same goal at the same time, because many times agencies would play one against the other to say, well, we're not going to move on this until that agency does that. Well, that's not acceptable. So there was an effort to try to get everyone moving in the same direction at the same time. And there was some accountability from the White House, and I'm going to forget the office. It's the CEQ office, that a gentleman was running, and just basically his job was solely to make sure that these major projects were moving, down the field, and if they got hung up, that he was pulled in, and that's Alex Hergott I'm referring to, Adam. And basically, we tried to do the same thing at the state level, albeit that hasn't really, that was legislation that took place 2 sessions ago. We still haven't really seen that agency set up that is going to keep everything moving in the same direction at the same time. But quite frankly, there's not a huge need for it at the state level, because things are actually working pretty well.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to make sure that I get this question out, because I know we're going to lose Glenn here pretty soon. Glenn, you're about ready to do a ride along at Phoenix International Raceway. For those of you who haven't visited Arizona, when you do come out here, definitely see if you can get in a race at PIR. It's really a wonderful facility. And Glenn, I can't wait to hear from you about how that ride along went. But one question I did want to ask you is if you're talking to folks back in Toronto, you're talking to people in Vancouver, you're talking about why Arizona is a good place to invest in, a solid investment. What words of wisdom do you give them on that front?
Well, I think, post-pandemic, Adam, there's been a geopolitical shift. And I think that states like Arizona have now found themselves in a very unique position. We're very fortunate that we're pro-business and we're pro a lot of things, because at this moment in time, there are a lot of people doing relocations out of Canada. And they are looking at places that they used to go to, like California and parts of the East Coast. And they are finding that quality of living is probably just as important as anything else with telecommunication. We're a perfect example on this call. So we are watching the Canadian infrastructure individuals, the large funds in Canada, are for the very first time starting to really focus. You saw a little bit of that when when Brookfield put that $15 billion into Intel. You saw it when Couche-Tard put a couple of billion into all the Circle Ks here. So we're starting to see more and more of this vernacular come in as Canadians. Put it in perspective, institutional Canadian funding in India has reached $1 trillion. And they are now looking here again into the States. It's cyclical. And Arizona has got a giant bullseye on it, because those neighbors of yours that were snowbirds for so many years, irony of ironies, they were also decision makers in some pretty interesting companies. And now that geography is being replaced by technology, they have options to be in a place that's sunny, warm, sports, entertainment, and Arizona scratches all those itches. And that's something that we are watching over and over and over again. We can barely keep up with the amount of Canadian interests in investing and companies moving here. Not just from Canada, but from the US, other parts of the US where they're relocating Canadian companies here, because the quality of life and the quality of living and the politics seem to be what they're interested in.
Thank you, Glenn. And Buck, I'm going to pick on you real quick here, like lightning round question. If you gotta tell anybody who might have some doubts about the future of Arizona, how do you feel the future looks for our state and for developing business and mining and agriculture and all the different things that make our state what it is?
Well, like I kind of mentioned it earlier, I am biased. I'm a part of this, been a part of this administration, been a part of the state for a long time, but I just feel like we've created momentum, and it's working, and our state is growing, and good things are happening here. And I think that Arizonans are going to continue to demand that its government and continues to go down this path. So I think the short of it, Adam, is I think we've created momentum. Now, again, it's hard for me to predict the future. I think Steve said it, I've said it. We are in transition time. I don't know what the election will bring, one way or the other. But even so, I'm just optimistic. Like I said, that we've created momentum for good things to continue in this state.
Thank you, and that's it, and it's great to hear, and it really means a lot to hear that Arizona is, despite all of the challenges that are happening, that people like you who are at the forefront of it still believe in what we have to offer. Steve, I'm going to throw you one quick one. The Arizona Mining Association just had its annual meeting, just wrapped up its annual meeting this week in Tucson. You invited in Lee McFeeters, who is a pretty well-known economist at Arizona State University. He had some really, really interesting information to share. Were there a couple of kind of high points that you could pull out? And in particular, kind of with the predicted recession in place, McFeeters thought that Arizona really wasn't going to get hit that hard.
Yeah, it's interesting. Arizona is a unique state where, even during the pandemic, we were thriving. Obviously, mining remained essential, and that's due in large part to the efforts of the governor's office. I think what we have going for us here, in large part, is that we are well positioned to deliver renewable energy minerals. I think we're also able to assist in the supply chain issues, and with our partners to the north in Canada, I think that will continue to be the case, as well as our trade partners to the south. And we are doing our best. I mean, my gosh, mining is an incredible opportunity from a vocational standpoint. I mean, we're creating high paying jobs. When we go and talk to and by the way, our unemployment rate currently is 3.5%, which I was actually surprised by. It's much higher in other places in the nation. But when I talk to guidance counselors at high schools, when we're targeting these students to try to get them thinking about mining engineering or other opportunities in mining, they're shocked to find out what we pay here in Arizona. We're going to continue here in the state and obviously support our National Association efforts to promote efficient permitting processes. We certainly are looking at fiscal policies, and you heard me mention before that our tax, our tax policies are excellent in the state of Arizona, including a 2.5 flat tax that was just authorized by the legislature last year and signed by the governor's office. I mean, these are the things that just continue to happen. We're redefining ways to make Arizona better, as Buck has mentioned. And then, of course, the real focus is going to be, Adam, as you kind of started off with, is recognizing that federal nexus and where we can be helpful there. I did not mention that this election will also impact Congress dramatically. So that could be an opportunity for change. And what we're seeing from the Western Caucus and so forth, the folks that are focused on these natural resources and mineral supply chain issues, is that there are a slew of bills that would make a lot of difference, but we're waiting for the results of the election. So all that to say, I think, the prospect is looking pretty good.
Thanks, Steve. And speaking of looking really good, and as we're getting up to the top of the hour here, and by the way, Steve, Buck, if you do need to jet, we really appreciate all of your time. You're welcome to stay as long as you'd like, and as long as we've got questions. But I also do want to respect the fact that you got busy schedules here. I'm going to turn it to Travis here real quick. And Travis, I'm putting you on the spot here, so don't stick too many pins in my voodoo doll. But in 2017, the Cactus Mine was effectively a liability. I mean, it was a previously mined dormant site that had some money in a trust for management of it, but not really enough to be able to really effectively close the site. Okay. Since Arizona Sonoran has bought that property in 2020, where have things gone? Can you give us some highlights of what that picture has looked like?
Oh boy, yeah. So we started drilling around the Cactus Pit, and we started drilling at the old waste rock dump and at Cactus East, and put out a PEA on it, and a couple billion pounds of copper. And then we started drilling on this little kind of unknown little area called Park Sawyer, and just recently put out a press release of almost 3 billion pounds of additional copper. So it's looking really good. Plus, we've been working really hard on getting our permits in place.
Thank you, Travis. And so the one thing, if nothing else, as an observer to this process, I'm hoping folks can take away from this is that process to make this happen, to be able to reactivate this site, to turn something that was previously dormant into something that is a real job creator. We did an economic study even before they discovered the Park Salyer deposit, but the Economist came up with the number 8.6 billion, which that's the economic impact on the local area of direct, indirect, and induced spending. The equivalent of bringing a Super Bowl to Casa Grande, which sits just in between Phoenix and Tucson, every other year for nearly 2 decades. All of this was because the state had the vision to help bring a private company to come in and partner to create this opportunity for the environment, for the taxpayer, and production of copper and job creation. So
yeah,
it's pretty phenomenal.
Quite a turnaround from a little abandoned mine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, folks, I want to thank you again for participating in this. We're almost to the very top of the hour here. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Buck. Thank you, Travis. Thanks to Glenn for joining us here. I hope that everything goes well at the racetrack. Just a reminder, this will be recorded for later rebroadcast. And if you do want to tweet about this, if you can tag us and also do a hashtag, we're asking for today, Canada Rocks, hashtag Arizona Rocks. So hashtag Canada Rocks, hashtag Arizona Rocks. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day out here in Arizona. For those of you coming to us from the East Coast and from Canada's East Coast, have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon.